Number 1. The Garden. This is a really different story, and I'm not sure if you will like it or not, but it is the scariest thing to ever happen to me. I used to live on a pretty big property. It might have been more than an acre. It had a nice garden in the backyard, and off to the left of the house. We never did anything with the garden, though. There were old, dry, dead plants in it. We sometimes did throw sticks into the garden, though, like right before we mowed the lawn. It seemed like the best place to put them. This happened on a night that my family was away. They were visiting relatives. You know, it is funny thinking about it, but it seems like a lot of teenagers stop taking family trips when they get to a particular age. It was cool getting a full week in the house all by myself. The low point was that we lived on a ridge, where the houses were few and far between. We were far enough out in the country that we definitely were not able to order a pizza, but my parents got me a lot of frozen pizza, even though it's not as good. It was pretty late at night. I was watching a horror movie or something like that. Something was off. I wasn't sure what it was, but after a while, I was smelling something. After checking around the house, I noticed something outside. There happened to be a fire in the garden. In fact, it was a pretty big fire. I couldn't call the fire department. They were too far away. I couldn't risk the fire getting to the house. So I ran out, and I got the hose that we'd use to water the lawn. It was a very long hose, so it was no problem getting it to the garden. But the fire was huge and raging, and when I first began spraying it, it looked like I was not even making a dent in it. I was terrified, thinking that I would not be able to stop it, and if it grew and got to the house, it could burn the house down. Finally, though, the fire began going down. It took a long time, and I probably emptied the entire well trying to get it to go down. Eventually, I was able to defeat the fire, and the garden probably never looked worse. But that was not the end of it. Even though it was dark outside, I was able to see a shadow watching me from across the barbed wire fence that circled my yard. But it was only for a moment, and then he ran off into the forest. I was too shocked to move or go after him, but it seemed obvious to me that this person must have started the fire. I had liked taking walks down country roads. The next day after the fire, I walked by the house of a guy I knew from school. He was a bit weird, but he was not a jerk or a bully or anything. He ran up to me, and after talking a little, he asked if it was difficult for me to put out the fire. A fire that no one could have known about, other than me. And then I remembered something. During the day, maybe 2 days before, I went on another walk and went by his house. He was out in the yard and waved at me. Running up to me, we had a quick chat, and I had mentioned that my parents were away. Everything made sense to me right there. The kid had started the fire. He had to have, because no one else knew about it other than me. I had absolutely no idea what to do. I was in shock, but I didn't mention any of it to him. I mean, the kid was crazy enough to start a fire in a garden, and he was crazy enough to do it to a house. I was nervous and didn't feel better when I got home. I was also nervous for a very long time, thinking that he would do something else. Luckily for me and my family, he didn't. Number 2. Cabin. For a while when I was younger, I lived in a very rural and old little cabin. It was off in the hills in Kentucky, and I was able to stay there because it belonged to a family member. At the time, I had a job, working for a guy doing odd jobs, mostly in the summer, but he didn't have much work in the winter for me to do. So the little bit of money that I made during the warmer months had to be stretched out across the whole year. So for that, I had to live somewhere that didn't cost me much money. So my relative loaning the cabin out to me, which he never used anyway, worked out pretty good. The thing about it, though, was that it was pretty far out in the country, deep in the hills. It took me a long time to get anywhere that I needed to get to. So, because of that, I was away from the place a lot, especially when I was working. It was always a really dark and often a cold place to come back to, though. This happened during the early fall, when I was still having some jobs to do for the guy. In fact, at this point, he had me doing a whole lot more work than was usual for that time of year. I didn't mind since he paid me better when there was actually more to do, and I needed the money as much as I could get before all the work dried up for the winter months. So I was probably working 12-hour days for him, in addition to the hour it took to go to and from the cabin to his place. So basically for several weeks, I was just going home to sleep and eat before coming back and going to get more work done. After a particularly late night, for a couple nights, I wasn't able to drive all the way out to the cabin. I was able to stay at a friend's place for a few nights, sleeping on his couch. These were the last days that I would be working for him that season, so I went ahead and did it, even though I didn't sleep that great on the sofa. When all of that was done, on the last workday, I was eager to return to the cabin for sleep. That last day was long, and it was pretty late before I headed home. Plus, on the way there, I had trouble not falling asleep while I was driving. When I finally got home, all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and then go to sleep. But something happened that woke me up really quickly when I pulled up to the cabin. There were lights on inside it. There were electrical lines all over the hills, so I did have electricity while I was living there. However, one of the last things that I would do is leave a light on. Because I didn't have a whole lot of money, I would conserve what I did have as much as possible, which means I couldn't make such mistakes. I didn't pull all the way up to the cabin, and I cut the lights on my truck and then turned the engine off. I was hoping I'd just made a stupid mistake, but I wanted to be careful just in case. I approached the cabin, and then looking in the window, I saw something that I never would have expected, even if I had lived for 1,000,000 years. There was a man inside of my cabin. He was sitting on my couch, facing away from the window that I was peering in from. I heard some noise and realized that he was listening to my radio. I didn't know what to do at first. The situation was just so bizarre. I didn't know if the guy could have been dangerous, but anyone who breaks into another person's home, I supposed, had to be considered dangerous. I went back over to my car, and I pulled out a tire iron that was in the back. After that, I went and carefully opened the door of the cabin. Walking in, I made enough noise that the man in there heard it, and he looked at me. He had the craziest eyes that I'd ever seen on a person. The man got up and faced me. He began ranting in the craziest voice that I'd ever heard. He was going on and on about me being in his house. But not only that, he was injecting a bunch of nonsense into his ranting. I was too scared to move. I had never seen anything like this before. I couldn't even raise the tire iron at first. It was just really scary. However, it got scarier when the guy came toward me. I went ahead and raised the iron in order to protect myself, but I was still in shock, and I didn't hit him with it. The man grabbed me and kept yelling at me, but that only lasted for a moment. He screamed, "I'm going to get my gun," and then he ran into my bedroom. I wasn't worried about a gun. I didn't keep one in the house. I was worried about this obviously disturbed man who was in my cabin. I went out to my car, and I drove it a little way down the street. Then I went and called the police when I figured I was safely away from the man. I waited until the cars were in the driveway before I drove back. The guy did have a gun on him. He was a local hermit who had done things like this before. He had obvious mental issues and had spent time in psychiatric hospitals. Other people weren't as lucky as I was and were attacked by him in the past. I am lucky I left when I did. Number 3. Odd. I was pretty good friends with a guy named Chris for most of my life when this happened. The area we grew up in was a really hilly area without a whole lot of other houses around. We were the same age, and we lived in the same area, not too far away from each other's houses. Not having a lot of other kids in the area, we were lucky to have each other as friends. We grew up and did most things together, and of course went to the same schools together. But mostly, during the summers, when we couldn't hang out with others in school, we spent nearly every day hanging out with each other. Now, the main thing was, though, that normally Chris would come over to my place, and we would either do something at my house, or we would go off to do something else from there. We very rarely went over to his place. I really didn't know his parents well, but he knew mine really well. I figured that he just preferred being over at my place because my family was a lot more well off than his was. I always got the impression that he felt a little embarrassed to have me over to his house. I didn't care about that one way or the other, but I almost never pressed it because I didn't want to make my best friend uncomfortable. I remember this night and day for many reasons. The first reason is because it was unbelievably hot the night before. Chris and I had hung out all day, and he had checked with his parents about spending the night over at my place. We had air conditioning and his family didn't. Plus, I had video game systems and he didn't. So, on a hot night, it was much preferable to be in a place with AC, video games, and cable TV to watch. So, we had a pretty good night. In fact, he stuck around for a lot of the following day, too. When Chris finally figured he had to go home, I decided I would walk him home, and then come back on my own. I enjoyed taking walks along the roads at night, but I also knew that Chris would get a little scared if he had to take the walk all alone. He would never admit it, but I could tell that he was nervous, so I just invited myself along. Walking around in the hills, even if you were walking along the road, could be a really scary journey. There were no lights out there at all. I brought along a flashlight, just in case we needed it, but other than that, we relied on the light from the moon, in addition to just letting our eyes become used to the darkness. The rocks that made up the roads were very white too, so I guess that made it much easier to see where we were going. Although taking walks like this didn't scare me, I could understand why it freaked Chris out so much. You couldn't see much while you were out there, and there were always some really weird noises out there too. Your eyes and your mind could start playing tricks on you too, and if you had an active imagination, which Chris absolutely did, it could definitely run away on you pretty easily. Still, I guess I didn't have the kind of imagination that Chris did. Nothing bothered me, and I knew that I would have no problem walking back after I dropped him off. We came to his driveway. I was originally going to just let him walk up to the house on his own and begin my own way back. But there was something about the look on his face that kept me from suggesting it. He looked concerned and even scared. "Do you mind coming up to the house with me?" he asked, a tiny bit of fear in his voice. "Something doesn't seem right to me." I had no problem with that, although I also had no idea what he was talking about. But when we began walking up the driveway, I also noticed that he was walking a bit more slowly and a bit more cautiously. He was truly concerned about something. As we got closer to the house, suddenly the outside light came on, but then it went out just as quickly. When this happened, I suddenly noticed that no lights had been on in the house to begin with. I thought that perhaps all the lights being out was what was concerning Chris. It was obviously too early for his parents to be going to bed, so it was weird. He asked me to come into the house with him, and I did. It was like the quietest I'd ever seen a place be. He knocked on his parents' door and got no answer. So, after knocking for a while, he opened the door and then went inside. He came out of the room and informed me that his parents were not in there. I asked him if they would have gone out, but their car was there. I suggested that maybe they had gone for a walk, but he told me they never did that. You see, the weird thing about all this was the way that Chris was acting. He was talking like he was surprised they were gone, but he wasn't sounding like he was surprised. That is about the best way I could describe it. It was very off-putting. After a while, I suggested he call the police, and he told me he wouldn't. Then, he told me that he was tired and wanted to go to sleep. I made sure he didn't want me to remain there with him, and he told me no. So I went to walk home. I was creeped out by Chris that day. Unfortunately, it was the last time that I had ever seen him too. When he wouldn't call or come over, I finally went to the house, and no one was there. I don't know what happened to Chris or his parents or anything. I don't know if they just left, but that car was still there. Their belongings were there, but they weren't. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, I want to thank all of my paid patrons, starting with my VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. I also want to thank Heidi H, Chronic J, Stinking Ooze, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Kelli Clark, and Broken Angel. I'm sorry it took so long to get this out to you. I guess it was rather difficult finding some stories right after everything that happened, but fortunately I was able to find these 3, and I found a few others too that I haven't recorded, which will be used in the upcoming week. I promise you I'll never make you wait this long for a video ever again. And if you like the video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the subscribe button if you're interested, and the bell so you'll be notified of new videos. Leave me a comment, which I'll do my best to get back to, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. And now, I'd like to mention all of my free Patreon members: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, Evil Black Cat, Lori Hicks, Lisa Herman, Krystal Robin, Hillbilly 13, RhettSchall, John Tull, Baby and Baby, Sherry Hubbard, and Vina Waldren. But as usual, most importantly, don't forget to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.